Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven speaking from Jerusalem, Israel today. Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, the first day of the new month of Tammuz, 5780. Tammuz, the fourth month of the Hebrew year. It's June 23rd, 2020. Hashem spoke to Moshe and Aharon, saying, "This is the statute of the Torah which Hashem commanded, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and have them take for you a perfectly red, unblemished cow, upon which no yoke was laid, and ye shall give it to Eleazar the Kohen, and he shall take it outside the camp and slaughter it in his presence. Eleazar the Kohen shall take from its blood with his finger and sprinkle it toward the front of the tent of meeting 7 times. The cow, Para Adumah, let's call it from now on, the red heifer, shall then be burned in its presence, its hide, its flesh, its blood, with its dung he shall burn it. The Kohen shall take a piece of cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson wool, and cast them into the burning of the cow. The Kohen shall wash his garments and bathe his flesh in water, and then he may enter the camp, and the Kohen shall be unclean until evening. The one who burns it shall wash his clothes in water and cleanse his body in water, and he shall be unclean until evening. A ritually clean person shall gather the cow's ashes and place them outside the camp in a clean place, and it shall be as a keepsake for the congregation of the children of Israel for sprinkling water used for cleansing. That is for making what is tameh tahor, making what is impure pure. We're speaking specifically of the impurity which is contracted by contact with death. The ashes of the red heifer make that impurity pure. We're continuing, verse 10. The one who gathers the cow's ashes shall wash his clothes, and he shall be unclean until evening, and it shall be an everlasting statute for the children of Israel and for the proselyte who resides in their midst. Anyone touching the corpse of a human soul shall become unclean for 7 days. On the 3rd and 7th day he shall cleanse himself with it, so that he may become clean. But if he does not sprinkle himself with it on the 3rd and 7th days, he shall not become clean. Whoever touches the corpse of a human soul which dies, and he does not cleanse himself, he has defiled the Mishkan, the tabernacle of Hashem, and that soul shall be cut off from Israel. For the sprinkling water was not sprinkled on, the sprinkling water meaning the water of the ashes of the red heifer, so he remains unclean, and his uncleanness remains upon him. This is the law. This is the Torah. If a man dies in a tent, anyone entering the tent and anything in the tent shall be unclean for 7 days. Any open vessel which has no seal fastened around it becomes unclean. Anyone who touches one slain by the sword, or a corpse, or a human bone, or a grave in an open field, he shall be unclean for 7 days. They shall take for that unclean person from the ashes of the burnt purification offering, and it shall be placed in a vessel filled with sprinkling water. A ritually clean person shall take the hyssop and dip it into the water and sprinkle it on the tent and on all the vessels and on the people who were in it, and on anything who touched the bone, the slain person, the corpse, or the grave. The ritually clean person shall sprinkle on the unclean person on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, and he shall cleanse him on the 7th day, and he shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and he shall become ritually clean in the evening. If a person becomes unclean and does not cleanse himself, that soul shall be cut off from the congregation, for he has defiled the sanctuary of Hashem. The sprinkling waters were not sprinkled upon him. He is unclean. This shall be for them as a perpetual statute, a chok. And the one who sprinkles the sprinkling waters shall wash his clothes, and one who touches the sprinkling water shall be unclean until evening. Whatever the unclean one touches shall be unclean, and anything touching him shall be unclean until evening. Those 22 verses are what self-described as Torah, Chukat HaTorah. It's the chok of the Torah concerning the ashes of the red heifer, their preparation, their application, and what they do. Wow. This is the beginning of this week's Parashat of Chukat, which we're reading here in the land of Israel. Chukat begins in Book of Numbers, chapter 19, verse 1 concludes, and chapter 22, verse 1. Everyone in the diaspora still 1 week behind us here in Israel. You're going to catch up next week, but you're still 1 week behind. You are reading this week Parashat Korach, which begins Book of Numbers, chapter 16, verse 1, concludes chapter 18, verse 32. I have been balancing between the two parshiot, the two Torah readings between the land of Israel and the diaspora over the past few weeks, when the discrepancy first arose because of the 2-day Shavuot observance in the diaspora. And this week, however, I'm going to focus really on Parashat Chukat, because it is so fascinating, because the chok of the Praduma, the red heifer, is so important and so illuminating on so much of Torah and what it means and what it's about and our relationship with Hashem. So I apologize for people who are focusing on Korach. We spoke about it last week in Temple Talk. Again, just as a quick summary, Korach was really followed right in the footsteps of the sin of the spies, and it was just the next chapter in basically a breakdown of order in the Israelite encampment. A big rebellion by Korach, which was crushed by Moshe, who called upon God to open up the earth, to swallow up Korach, and God answered Moshe's call. And following that, there was a second rebellion of Israelites who said, why are you so harsh? Well, did he really deserve that? And again, Moshe had to reprove his authority, his God-given authority. He didn't choose it, nor did he choose of his own accord to make his brother Aaron the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. This was Hashem's choice, and Moshe had to make that clear to everybody. So then we have the whole episode of the staffs of the different tribes, and only Aaron's staff was blessed by God's choosing him to continue to remain as the Kohen Gadol. His staff overnight flowered with blossoms, almond blossoms and fruits. And again, slowly things seem to be calming down, settling down. So this week, Chukat. Now, the chok, which is the Hebrew word for ordinance, it's a word for ordinance. There's another word sometimes we say in Hebrew, in English, for this word statute. Ordinance or statute is a certain type of Torah commandment, mitzvah. It's a commandment from Hashem to us that is between us and Hashem. It's not between man and man. That is, it's not a law like, be kind to your neighbor, don't murder, etc., etc. Also, it's the other unique aspect of a chok is that no reason's given for it. Right? Classic chok would be kashrut. The animals listed in Leviticus, the clean and unclean animals, pure and impure animals. Why we can eat the flesh of a cow, but not the flesh of a donkey. Right? Makes perfect sense to us because that's our tradition. But no reason is given for it, and no reason is needed. God said to do it. We're doing it. This is a proof of our closeness, of our love for Hashem, and of Hashem's love for us. He gave us something, paramountly doable. And all we have to do is do it in order to express our love for Hashem. But what they say, what we learn, what our sages have taught us, is that the chok, the statute par excellence in the Torah, which is very much hinted at by the second verse of this week's parasha. This is the statute of the Torah. This is the statute of the Torah. This is the one that's going to, blow all the other ones away, so to speak. The chok, the statute of the Parah Adumah, the red heifer. It's understood to be not understandable. It's understood to be way beyond our grasp, our intellectual grasp, to understand why, how, the why and the how of it. Why a red heifer? And how do the ashes of the red heifer, even though the preparation, the ingredients that go into it, the cedar, the hyssop, the wool dyed with scarlet, with tolat shani dye, red dye, the pure waters, living waters that we take from the Shiloach pool in Ir David, in the city of David, it's all described in detail, and we know how to do it, but how and why it achieves and affects what it affects, we don't know. And what does it affect? It can purify someone whose being has become, let's say, tainted, has become impure by contact with a corpse, with a dead body, either directly or indirectly. For example, it mentions that if a person enters into a tent, a covered area in which there is a corpse, then they contract this impurity, this contamination, as it were. And this contamination, this impurity, is of the highest order of all the impurities. We learned about impurities in the book of Leviticus. And this one, which is the impurity of death, we're only learning about now, even though clearly it was something which was taught, which was received at Mount Sinai and taught by Moshe to the people of Israel way before, chronologically, or at least in our order of reading of the Torah, because in order to bring the Passover offering, people needed to be pure. And we know that we learned earlier in the book of Numbers that men approached Moshe at the beginning of the second year, the first Passover after leaving Egypt, and they said, we can't bring the Passover offering because we're impure, contact with a corpse. And that's when Moshe, who didn't know the answer, questioned God, and God gave him the answer, and we know what the answer is. So if they were impure, they knew that there was a way to become pure, but they hadn't been able to achieve that in time. Okay, so it seems very clear that this chok, the statute of the red heifer, was given over much earlier in our story, in the history of the Israelite nation in the desert. Why is it only being brought here now? It's another part of the mystery. So much that we don't understand, and really the purifying powers of the red heifer, however, whatever, they're coming to purify an impurity that has to do with death, with mortality, with the cessation of life on earth, with the cessation of our mortal coil, of our physical being, which is, of course, a grand mystery to us, because even though we believe that there is life beyond our physical life, that our soul is eternal and immortal, we really don't understand what this thing about death is about. And we really don't know for certain what the afterlife really is. We can't possibly know, because we can only understand in our minds what we can picture, what we can grasp, even as a metaphor in a physical sense. So it's very unclear what awaits us in the great beyond, even though we're confident that something awaits us. So this is all part of the mystery, part of the unknown about the purifying power of the ashes of the red heifer. And how could it be otherwise, really? You know, we're going to find out, we're going to be able to study and understand and learn the mechanism, you know, the chemical compounds, the DNA of what it's all about. You know, it hardly seems possible. I was having a discussion the other night with some friends about the red heifer, the ashes of the red heifer. And the question came up, do you think that the ashes of the red heifer really cause a change or not? So that's a loaded question. What does it mean, cause a change? Cause a physical change? A spiritual change? No, I think the question meant, does it cause a physical change? Does a person who is treated, who has sprinkled on them the ashes of the red heifer, have they undergone now a physical change or simply a spiritual? Maybe I shouldn't use the word spiritual, or a spiritual change. Is there a physical component to it? We don't really know. I suppose if scientists could, examine it and analyze it and track it and, quote, prove it on a physical basis, that might satisfy some people's curiosity. But does it matter? No. We're told by God that this is the way we prepare the ashes, and this is how we apply the ashes of the red heifer. And by doing so, we release ourselves from the grip of the impurity of death, which is a very, very liberating concept when we think about it. Because you might say, well, it's not death itself, it's only impurity contracted by being in contact with a corpse. But even this concept that we have a power over it, that God gives us a mechanism, a means of lifting ourselves up over the finiteness of death and the limiting aspect of death, even on a conceptual basis, is very, very liberating. And of course, in order to enter into the inner courtyards of the Holy Temple, to bring our offerings, to perform our service, we need to be purified from the impurity of death, meaning we need to be first treated, if we have come in contact with a corpse, with the ashes of the red heifer. Meaning that the Holy Temple itself, the place where God's presence dwells, is a place of absolute, unequivocal life. There's not a hint, not a shadow, not a speck of death or of the impurity of death. It's total life. And you may say, wait a minute, Yitzhak, what about all the offerings? We take animals, we slaughter them. That's part of the mystery. That's part of the mystery of the offerings. And that's why they themselves have the power to affect changes in us, in our beings, in our spiritual essence. Because, yes, they're being slaughtered, but their eternal essence is also being released. There's no death. There's no death in the confines, the boundaries of the Holy Temple. And only when we distance ourselves from the Holy Temple physically do we re-emerge into a world, our world, where there's life and death, where there's good and bad, where there's choice, where there's responsibility for our own actions. So this is I've just touched upon, the outer shell of this whole mystery of the red heifer. It's a fascinating thing, and it's so essential, so central to who we are as Jews and what the Torah is about and what our relationship is with God. And again, it is a chok, meaning we do it. We do it, and it does us. It has an effect on us, whether we understand it or not. We follow the instructions, and it changes our life. It changes our world. On the Temple Institute's website, we have a very long, in-depth, beautiful, fascinating treatise on the red heifer. If you go to templeinstitute.org and you look at the menu under study tools, you will see at the very top red heifer. Like I said, in-depth, fully illustrated, fascinating explanation from all different perspectives about the red heifer, what it's all about, what its meaning is to us today. And of course, the red heifer is is essential, an essential ingredient in the rebuilding of the Holy Temple and the renewal of the divine service in the Holy Temple, which is why the Temple Institute is fully engaged and has been for the past number of years in the effort to raise a red heifer here in Israel. You have seen periodic postings of photos and videos of our candidates for red heifer. A red heifer has to reach the age of 2 years old while still being completely red in color. The word para aduma, people say, well, what kind of red is that? Is it fire engine red? Is it cherry red? Well, aduma in Hebrew is from the same word as adama and edom, which is red, and adama is earth. So it's a red, earthy color. It's not a fire engine red. It's not an artificial red. It's a very real red. It's not a supernatural, mystical type red. It's a red heifer. It's an animal that exists. What makes the red heifer rare is that if it has more than a single hair on it that is not red, it no longer qualifies to be a red heifer. Even its hooves have to be of a reddish hue, and the flesh around its nose and eyes has to be of a reddish hue. And this exists in nature. Everything, all the components of the red heifer, of the ashes of the red heifer, exist in nature. We have the cedar, the erez, which is a cedar wood. And our sages tell us that the cedar wood, is a very tall, stately tree that grew most prominently in Lebanon. And of course it was used for the construction of the Holy Temple because it was so strong and so straight and so long, these cedar trees. And that represents a certain majesty. That aspect goes into this, the ashes, gets burnt with the body of the red heifer. And the other ingredient is zov, which is an herb very similar to oregano, grows here in Israel. It's very lowly, low to the ground. It's modesty, smallness. These are just part of the ingredients that go into the ashes of the red heifer. Here is the music, and I'll be right back. Temple Talk. Shalom and welcome back to Temple Talk. Yitzhak Reuven speaking from Jerusalem, Israel today. Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, the first day of the Hebrew month of Tammuz. The year is 5780. It is also the 23rd day of June 2020. We have been talking all about the red heifer, which is featured in the opening chapter of this week's Parashat read here in Israel, Chukat, Numbers 19:1 to 22:1. Again, you in the diaspora are on Korach. 1 week behind us in Torah reading. You will be catching up next week when you read a double portion of Chukat and Balak, and we will be reading Balak. So next week you will be catching up. And next week, God willing, we will also be posting a video update of the status of the red heifer candidates that the Temple Institute is currently raising here in Israel. So stay tuned for that update. It's always is very exciting to get the video and to post it and to share it with everybody, because everybody is interested in seeing this move along and for Israel and the world to progress to the next stage in the preparation for the building of the Holy Temple. I want to continue talking about Parashat Chukat, but I'm going to take a moment and first say a few words about Tammuz, this fourth month of the Hebrew year. Of course, Tammuz is a month with a burden. What's the burden? The burden is that the 12 spies who went into the land of Israel for 40 days and returned to the Israelite encampment in the desert and gave an evil report, a dibata aretz, evil report about the land, which caused an outcry, and Israel lost heart and wanted to turn around and go back to Egypt, despite the pleas of Joshua and Caleb, the two spies who had a minority opinion and said, of course we can go into the land. If God has promised it to us, of course we can do it. We can do it. We can do it. It's a very good land, they said. But the other 10 spies carried the day, unfortunately. And so their 40-day sojourn was translated by God. Their 40-day sojourn in the land of Israel was translated by God into 40 years of wandering in the desert as a punishment for Israel's lack of faith in Hashem, lack of faith in themselves, and lack of faith in the land of Israel. So, but they actually entered the land of Israel on the final day of the month of Sivan, which precedes Tammuz. They were in the land of Israel for the entire month of Tammuz and returned on the 9th of Av, that fateful day. That's when they gave their evil report, which is why the 9th of Av has carried that burden ever since in our history. So the month of Tammuz was from day 1 to day 30. For the entire month of Tammuz, the spies were in the land of Israel. And so Tammuz is associated with, from beginning to end, with the whole sin of the spies. You know, the blessing of the month of Av, called Menachem Av sometimes, which means the consoling father, is that from the second half, from the 15th of Av, Tu B'Av, there's a change in the whole spiritual essence of the month, and it becomes a very positive month. The burden of the spies and of the destruction of the temples which ensued is lifted, and we have a new start as we begin to approach the upcoming new year. But the month of Tammuz has no reprieve. And beginning on the 17th of Tammuz, which is a fast day, which marks the first day of the siege of Jerusalem, which led to the destruction of the temple. It's the beginning of the 3 weeks of mourning, 3 weeks of introspection concerning the destruction of the Holy Temple 2,000 years ago, and concerning the fact that we still haven't rebuilt the Holy Temple. I'm not going to get into that right yet. We have plenty of time for that, but the month of Tammuz carries this burden, and in fact, according to Kabbalistic understandings of the 12 months, each of the 12 months of the Hebrew year is represented by a different permutation of the 4-letter tetragrammaton of Hashem's ineffable name. The Yud, the K, the Vav, and the K of Hashem's name, which we don't pronounce, can be spelled by reassembling those 4 letters in different permutations, 12 different ways. And the permutation which is associated with the month of Tammuz is the name of Hashem spelled backwards. So it's, on the one hand, it's back. Everything's backwards. Everything's upside down. Everything is not the way it should be. On the other hand, if we were looking at Tammuz from God's perspective, it would be spelled the right way. It would be spelled in the correct order. So the month of Tammuz has both aspects to it, a positive and a negative. Now, we can affect the month of Tammuz, even though to this very day it is a month that is laden with a certain peril, where we have to be very cautious in the month of Tammuz, especially the 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av. We tone down our lifestyles. We don't take chances. We don't go on adventures. because it's just a difficult time in the year. It's proven, thousands of years of history. It has proven to be a difficult time. So we have to be very careful. But it's not like we can't do anything about it. And again, what caused this? It was the Lashon Hara. It was the evil speech. It was speaking poorly, badly of the land of Israel, and badly of the people of Israel's ability to enter and conquer the land and settle it. It was evil speech. And evil speech is a man-made invention. It comes from us. It comes from our soul, our heart, our lips, our mind. We control it. So if we can commit the sin, the crime of evil speech, we can certainly prevent it and overcome it. So cut out the evil speech. Think positive, be positive, say positive, speak of the land of Israel positively. You'll see in this month's of Tammuz on our Facebook page, we're posting every day a picture, a photograph taken somewhere of something in the land of Israel that's beautiful, with a pasuk, with a verse from the Tanakh, from the Hebrew scriptures, from Torah, discussing, mentioning the beauty of the land of Israel. Let's all work on it. We can affect change. We're not gonna get to where we need to go in history, bringing on the redemption, building the Holy Temple, by just treading water. And yes, building the Holy Temple means, building the vessels, which the Temple Institute has done. It means making blueprints for the Holy Temple, which the Temple Institute has done. It means gathering up the materials to build the Holy Temple. It means convening the people of Israel and saying now is the time to build a Holy Temple. It means the people of Israel deciding it's the time. It's the nations of the world getting on board. There's so much to be done. In the physical world, in the political world, in the spiritual world. But this is something that we can each do in our own personal sphere to help kindle the fires and to get things going. So I'm getting off my soapbox. That's it. That's it about the month of Tammuz for now. Let's go back to our weekly Torah reading of Chukat here in Israel. Immediately following these 22 verses, which describe the Red Heifer, we are told that the entire congregation of the children of Israel arrived at the desert of Tzin in the first month, and the people settled in Kadesh. Miriam died there and was buried there. The congregation had no water, so they assembled against Moshe and Aharon. Okay, this is chapter 20, beginning of chapter 20 of Book of Numbers. So immediately after the whole treatise about the Red Heifer, we're told that Israel settles in Kadesh, again in the desert still, and Miriam died there and was buried there. Immediately afterward, no water, right? And the people quarreled with Moshe, and they said, if only we had died with the death of our brothers before Hashem, why have you brought the congregation of Hashem to the desert so that we may and our livestock shall die there? Why have you taken us out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It's not a place for seeds or for fig trees or grapevines or pomegranate trees, and there is no water to drink. And Moshe and Aharon moved away from the assembly to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and they fell on their faces. Then the glory of Hashem appeared to them. Okay, and this is where God tells Moshe to speak to the rock, and water will come forth. And of course, Moshe takes his mateh, his staff, that he has used for so many miracles before, and he strikes the rock twice, and he says to the people of Israel, now listen, you rebels, can we draw water for you from this rock? And of course the water came out. The people had water, but Hashem was very, very angry with Moshe and Aharon, And Hashem says in verse 12, chapter 20, since you did not have faith in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore you shall not bring this assembly to the land which I have given them. Okay. So this is where basically God says to Moshe and Aaron, you're going to die in the desert also. You're not going into the land. Now, there's a lot to discuss here. First of all, this incident takes place right after the death of Miriam. Now, we don't know, we're not told what year Miriam died in the desert, other than that it was the first month. But Miriam, we know, had the zchut, the privilege, the merit to bless Israel with her well, with Be'er Miriam. Everywhere that the congregation, the people, the nation of Israel went in the desert, with Miriam, a Be'er, a well, would travel with them, so they'd have water. Miriam dies, and this explains why all of a sudden there's no water. Okay. And then we have the incident with the rock, and then Moshe and Aaron are both told they're going to die in the desert as well. So I find it very interesting that right before we're told in rapid succession of the death of the three prophets, Miriam, Aharon, and Moshe, the three leaders, the siblings who brought Israel out of Egypt and led Israel through the desert, that they're all going to die in the desert. And this is a huge blow to Israel in the desert. It's a huge blow to anybody reading about it. Wow, all of a sudden, 1, 2, 3, they're not going in. So I believe that is a reason why we are taught about the Parah Adumah and its amazing power and its symbolism of the power of life over death and of the eternal nature of our souls, of our spiritual being, to help soften the blow of the deaths of Miriam and Moshe and Aaron, the leaders of the generation of the desert. So Moshe, he gets the water out of the rock. So he took his staff and he struck the rock twice. Hashem's exceedingly angry. It seems to us like, okay, so Moshe was supposed to talk to the rock. He didn't. He hit the rock. Such a big screw up to be such a severe punishment? Now, the answer to that has been given is that, well, Moshe was, on such a high level that what would, for us lesser beings would be, a very forgivable mistake. For Moshe, it wasn't. It may have been his one mistake. We look back and Moshe had such an intimate relationship with Hashem, and he could argue with Hashem on the behalf of the people of Israel, and he could talk tough love with Hashem. And Hashem listened and honored and loved the fact that Moshe fought for his people. This is what proved to Hashem that Moshe was everything that Hashem said Moshe was, the most faithful servant in my house. But to make a small mistake was beyond what Hashem was able to accept. Now, another potential mistake. Maybe this was the mistake Moshe made. When he said, now listen, you rebels. Moshe is calling the children of Israel rebels. He's speaking to them very harshly. This is Moshe he's been frustrated by Israel before, many times. And he's cried to Hashem, I give birth to this people, that I have to have this burden of carrying them through the desert. Kill me, God, he says. Do away with me. But he's never spoken harshly like this to the entire assembly, to the entire nation. And what's interesting is that since this is going to be followed by the death of Aaron, and then we go into the final stages of Israel's journey in the desert. We know we're in the 39th year at this point. So it's very likely that Miriam died in the 39th year, and this is all happening in the 39th year, which means that basically there's very few people left of the generation of adults that came out of Egypt. Now it's that second generation. It's the generation of the young people who God said would enter into the land. So this is a different mindset altogether, these people. They've been in the desert for 40 years. You know, when they say there's no water, their frustration isn't coming from a position of, you know, a slave mentality that you have to provide for us everything. They're growing frustrated by still being in the desert. You know, we know, they're saying, we know that when we go into the land, we'll have plenty of water. We know that we can dig wells. We know that we can take care of ourselves. We're tired of the existence here in the desert. And of course, that's going to become even more clear in another chapter, again, later in the same Parsha of Chukat, where of course they say we're tired of the manna, you know, the stinking bread, this manna. They didn't say, you know, there's nothing to eat. They didn't say give us meat. They didn't say, you know, give us the food of Egypt. They say we're just tired of the manna. We're ready to go in. And at this point, the only thing holding them up really is the calendar. They just have to fill out those 40 years, and those final people have to die. And among those final people are Aharon and Moshe and whoever else is lingering on in life from that generation. So Moshe is, when he says you rebels, he's addressing the wrong people. He's really not relating to what their complaint is, to what their angst is, what's bothering them. He doesn't seem to quite grasp that they're not complaining because they want Moshe to continue to provide for them, you know, to the very last minute. No, they're complaining because they're ready. They're ready to go in the land. And so God sees this disconnect between Moshe, and he sees that Moshe no longer is the relevant leader for this new generation, which is why God says you're not going in. You know, you can't lead this people in because you're still stuck in the past at this point, God is saying. You didn't get what they're really complaining about, which doesn't make the incident of the rock any less tragic for Moshe, for Aharon, but it does make it more understandable, from my perspective at least. What is another mystery here this parsha, so full of mysteries, is Aharon, who we know made some very serious mistakes in the past, and they have been with the best of intentions. You know, the golden calf, the incident of the golden calf, he was very much involved in. He was trying to steer Israel away from the sin of idolatry. And Moshe was very angry with him when he saw what he had done. But Aaron wasn't punished for that. But here, he seems to be a bystander. I don't really know how he was directly involved in striking the rock with the staff twice. He seemed to be a bystander, but he's considered culpable by Hashem, and he also won't be going into the land of Israel. So there's a lot to wrap your head around, and it's just, you know, all these questions they're not we don't question them because we're questioning our faith. We question the integrity of what's happening. We question the truth of the Torah. No, these are questions from our soul, and it's in the questioning and in the effort to try to understand and grasp. That's how we not only learn, but that's how we absorb and gain insight and understanding and greater emunah, greater faith, and greater connection to Hashem and to the Torah of Hashem. And from here, again, as soon as this incident is over and Moshe and Aharon know they're not going into the land, the next verse comes to say, Moshe sends messengers to Edom to tell them we want to pass through your land, to get into the land. Moshe didn't hesitate. This was the greatest test for Moshe, and this is a tremendous testimony. He could have said, okay, you know what? I'll slow things down, give myself a little extra time. Maybe he wants to take a day off. Maybe he wants to, study the Red Heifer more. I don't know. But no, he says, I'm not going in, but I have to get these people in as soon as possible because that's what I was put in this earth to do. And even if I'm not going in, they're going in, and I'm not going to waste a moment here to hold them back. So he sends messengers to Edom saying, we just want to pass through your land. Of course, Edom said, no, they go to war, etc., etc. The next number of chapters deal with the wars leading up to Israel. Again, in the final verse of the Parsha, we're told, chapters 22, verse 1, the children of Israel journeyed and camped in the plains of Moab across the Jordan from Jericho. That's their final place before they will be entering into the land eventually. Thank you for listening. Temple Talk.